And thank you, choir. Why are you laughing? That's how I see y'all. Y'all ready? No, not today. You ready for some questions? I know most of y'all come ready for the word, so I thought I would shake things up a little. Especially because one of the things Nick sent to help me get ready for today painted a big spotlight on a well-known question in the Bible. And it hit me in a way it never had before. Nick has us in this series in the Bible's book of Exodus. And today's focal point is Passover. Now, Passover was like the pinnacle of the Jewish year, full of all kinds of celebrations and festivals. And when it was at its peak, I can't think of anything that compared to Passover. And there at the center of this massive celebration was a lamb. And a lamb is at the center of the question that hit me so hard. And a lamb is at the center of today's story. And as I hope to show, a lamb is still at the center of the story. And for those who don't know, my name is Len, and I have the privilege and the responsibility that comes with being care pastor here. And over the years, I've learned that a big part of being a care pastor is being chronically curious. You have this genuine and unshakable interest in who people really are, how they came to be that way, and how they're really doing. And that often leaves you with more questions than answers. Questions for people and questions about people. And the only book I've written was all about questions through the story of the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk. His questions for God and his questions about God. And he had a lot of questions when it came to God. And I learned a lot through Habakkuk, including how many questions are in the Bible. Did you know scholars who study this sort of thing say there are more than 3,000 questions in the Bible? Now, one of my favorite books claimed Jesus asked more than 300 questions, and he only directly answered 3. Now, I mentioned a question that rattled me as I began studying Passover for this week. And before we get into it, I want to mention a few things about the Bible that I believe are essential to this conversation. No book has been studied more carefully by believers and skeptics and scholars and even enemies. No book has been put through more scrutiny, more historical and linguistic analysis, and even archaeological testing. It is the most translated book in history, which makes it accessible to more people than any book ever. Now, many, if not most people, don't realize or they deny one of the most important things about the Bible. It is not apart from history, it is an essential part of history. And that's really important to make that distinction. The Bible is not apart from history, it is an essential part of history. Now, I spent the first decade of my vocational and professional life making fun of the Bible and people who believed it. And I've spent the past 37 years studying the Bible. And while there is no shortage of things in the Bible that can be hard to understand, it graphically and accurately details some of the most verifiable events and things in history. Now, for example, most people acknowledge the historical existence of Jesus of Nazareth, even though they differ in what they believe about him. Many faiths honor Jesus. Some call him a prophet. Some call him a great teacher. Only the gospel is built on what Isaiah predicted about Jesus. Jesus being pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our wrongs. And by his wounds, we are healed. See, only Christianity calls Jesus the Lamb. And Jesus, as the Lamb, brings me to the question that rattled me so much in what Pastor Nick sent me. And it came from someone for whom Nick and I share great appreciation. His name is Tim Keller. And Pastor Keller did some masterful teaching on Passover. And to set up one of his lessons, he followed a thread back from the original Passover, which is where we are in Exodus 12, back to one of the more well-known scenes in history with Abraham and his son Isaac. Now, some of us have very active imaginations. Raise your hand if you're one of me. Do you have an active imagination? Okay, good. If you are one of us, turn your imagination on high. Now, if you're not one of us, at least try to turn your imagination on for a few moments. We're in Genesis 22. Now, most Bibles have the heading, God tests Abraham's faith. Please stand as we read it, and as we go through it, really try to picture this scene. We don't know volume, we just see words. So I don't know if it was like, Abraham, or how God called. But Abraham replied, yeah, here I am. And as Nick showed us last week, that is a great way to respond to God. Although you may not be thrilled where it leads you, at least not initially. Check out what happened here. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Okay, gotcha so far, God. Sacrifice him. At least yikes. As a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. Now, to illustrate that Abraham was very unlike me, look at what it says next. The next morning, Abraham got up early. Got to wonder if he slept at all. And he saddled his donkey, and he took two of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac, and then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering, and set out for the place God had told him about. Now, that would have been like a cross-country hike from here to Hume Lake, with a command from God about sacrificing your only son echoing in your head with every step. On the third day of their journey, it says, Abraham looked up and he saw the place in the distance, and he told the servants, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back. Now, the bit about we fascinates me, because there are only two people here, right? Only two people going ahead. One of them had been told to sacrifice the other, but he still said, we will come back. Continues, Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the fire. What do you think the knife felt like in his hand? And as the two of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Daddy and said, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham answered, God will provide a lamb. Take your seats. I don't know how many times I've read that story over the years, but Isaac's question just kept jumping off the page at me this week. Where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Nick's teaching on Genesis is still rattling around in my head, and that question clicked with something crucial from the opening pages of the Bible. One of the things that came in the Garden of Eden that tends to get overlooked, one of the things that came in the Garden of Eden was the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of good and bad, the knowledge of right and wrong. Most people in our culture know the story of Eden well enough to know it is believed to be the birthplace of sin. We believe it is the birthplace of sin. Part of being made in God's image meant that as soon as Adam sinned, he knew something was wrong. And because of the sin that burst into the story, and because of how good our enemy is at twisting things, Adam began to think he could, and he had to take care of the wrong by himself before God found out. And that was as wrong as eating the fruit in the first place. And it brought fear, and it brought shame into paradise. Fear and shame. More forms of wrong. And Adam felt it deeply. And even though his actions show he knew they were wrong, the sin that had begun reproducing kept him from doing the right thing with them. Don't miss that. Sin is the very thing that keeps us from doing the right thing with it. Adam knew something was wrong. Knowing wrong is designed by God to be a big deal. I believe God was going to show and teach those first people all about it. But he was going to do it his way and in his time, but they got sucked into believing their timing and their way was better. And in case you didn't know, that's where we get it from. They came to know wrong in the fullest sense of the word know. And they felt it. They felt it to the core of their beings. And some of us feel wrong more than others. Feeling wrong, knowing wrong, the wrong around us and the wrong in us can be almost crushing at times. That's why some of us need to take regular breaks from things like the news or Facebook. Wrong just gets really heavy. But because of what came out of Eden, every culture, every human being has had a sense of right and wrong. Different cultures have different definitions of what is right and wrong. And we could go down a deep rabbit hole debating what is right and wrong, and about what is right and wrong, about what other people think is right and wrong. But because of sin, I just want to say something is at least a little wrong with everything. Now, that's not at all to say there aren't good things to enjoy. And we can and we should enjoy the things God says are good. And just as it was in Eden, God still has a long list of good things to enjoy. But one of his most stern warnings is as real for each of us as it was when he gave it to Cain in Eden. He said, sin is crouching at your door. Really do this. I don't want you to say this, and I want you to do this. I want you to turn to someone and say, hey, sin is crouching at your door. That's quite an image. That's an image of how sin lurks. It kind of skulks. It waits in the shadows, but it's like close by. And some of you feel that differently than others do. Some of you know it differently than others. But because of what we inherited from Adam and Eve, we all know it at some level. We all know something is at least a little wrong with everything here between Eden and heaven. Now, this is where it gets really uncomfortable. If something is at least a little wrong with everything, we each need to look in the mirror and admit there is at least something a little wrong with me. We all sometimes do, say, or think wrong things. And one of the worst things about having something wrong with us is the way it can get us to do the very same thing Adam did. And that is to turn the wrong way with it. To turn away from God with our wrong. I mean, we know we need to do something with it. But because of what it is, it sucks us into thinking we can and should fix it on our own. And we believe that once we do, then we can turn to God. in the scene with Abraham and Isaac. The Bible doesn't tell us what wrong needed to be dealt with. It does show them getting ready to deal with it in a sacrificial fire. And by that point in the human story, sacrifice in a wide variety of forms had become the widely accepted way to take care of wrongs and to make things right, especially with their gods. And that made its way into pretty much every culture. Each culture had, and every culture still has, a lot of what I call small g gods. Not capital G, small g gods. Our culture has as many small g gods as any culture ever has. Making small g gods is another wrong thing we learned to do in Eden. And it's what 16th century theologian John Calvin said about us. He said, the human heart is an idol factory. Ow. Every culture still has all kinds of small g gods. The God the Bible is about claims to be unlike any other God and above every other God. That's the God Abraham believed in. And although we don't know what wrong he and Isaac were going to address, we do know how and why they believed they had to do it. See, a question like Isaac's came out of the regular rhythm of life. Where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Now, Abraham answered, God will provide a lamb. Two key words there, the lamb, a lamb. If you read the story in Genesis 22, you'll see that from a distance it would have looked like God did that very thing and miraculously spared Isaac's life. And he did. And to most, the old ram that Abraham caught and sacrificed would have been as good as the young lamb that he and Isaac had talked about. And at that point in history, it was. The old ram was enough. But God's design was still unfolding. What Abraham said 4,000 years ago was still true. God will provide a lamb. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us if they ever talked about that road trip again. I don't know if I would ever bring it up with my dad. The next time Isaac is mentioned, Abraham was trying to find him a wife. That was Rebekah. Isaac and Rebekah had Jacob. Jacob gave in to a variety of sins crouching at his door, but he still fathered Joseph. And Joseph had a really bizarre band of brothers who, among other things, sold him as a slave in Egypt. When God miraculously rescued him, the Jews moved to where he was in Egypt, which is how they got there in the first place. And over time, there, the Jews were dragged into brutal slavery. And that's what's covered in the first 11 chapters of Exodus. And where we are in Exodus, as we hit Exodus chapter 12, it's like this spectacularly graphic illustration of what I mentioned about the Bible being about the God who is unlike any other God and above every other God. That's ultimately what the 10 plagues were about. You can read the details of them starting in Exodus 7. But one commentary says they were not just random disasters, but rather targeted acts of divine confrontation, each humiliating or discrediting a specific Egyptian god or goddess. That's what God told Moses and Aaron about the plagues. He said, I will execute judgment against all the gods, small g gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. And that's an echo of what God had told Moses earlier in the Exodus story. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. You ready for a quick summary of the first 9 plagues? Plague number 1, water to blood. That targeted the god of the Nile River. Nile was considered to be the lifeblood of Egypt. Plague number 2, frogs. The goddess of fertility and childbirth was depicted with a frog's head. Plague number 3 turned dust into gnats, showing even dirt obeys God. And even the Egyptian magicians on that one admitted, man, the finger of God did it. Specifically using one of the main words for Israel's God. Plague number 4, swarms of flies. That targeted their god of rebirth, who was often represented by something like our houseflies. Plague number 5 decimated their livestock. The Egyptian goddess of love and motherhood, sorry about this, was often portrayed as a cow. Plague number 6, painful boils, a slap in the face of their god of medicine and healing. Plague number 7, the devastating hail, hit 3 of their gods in one. The god of the sky, the god of the air, and the god of storms. Plague number 8, locusts, ravaging their crops. That hit their god of agriculture and their god of economy. Plague number 9, darkness. That slammed Ra, their sun god, one of the most powerful deities in Egypt. One of the more puzzling lines in the Bible. But Pharaoh still refused to let the Israelites leave, holding arrogantly to his own mocking question in one of his first interactions with Moses. Who is the Lord? Why should I listen to him? It seems there is a key difference between California culture and ancient Egyptian culture, especially among church people here and the Israelites there. It seems their big question was whether God could do those sorts of things. It seems most church people today think God could do things like that, but he never would. I mean, that doesn't seem very loving. As uncomfortable as it is, the Bible shows God could. God can, and God did do those kinds of things, which makes one of the things Nick keeps saying really heavy. What is true of the Exodus is... Uh-oh. And that brings us to Passover, recorded by Moses in Exodus 12. And we need to hold still long enough to ask ourselves if we believe it's true. And if it is, what is true about it for us today? Especially as we start to see the part the Lamb had in it. Because Exodus 12 marks a massive turning point. Not just in this story, but in history itself. It unfolded in the hearts of the best-known civilized world from that time. And even conservative estimates say between the Egyptians and the Jews, there would have been at least 5 million people living in that area. 5 million people directly and profoundly impacted by 9 plagues. Then we're told, God told Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. And after that, he will let you go from here. And when he does, he will drive you out completely. And overriding his earlier excuses and insecurities, Moses went before Pharaoh to tell him God himself was about to move through Egypt, and not just flies or frogs. God was going to move through, the one Pharaoh had mocked. And every firstborn in Egypt would die, rich or poor, palace or prison, Egyptian or Jew, even livestock. And God told Moses to brace himself because there will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. Exodus 12 has the instructions God gave to Moses. And once again, a lamb was at the center of the story. Each home was to bring one in, to prepare it, and then to sacrifice it. Remember what Abraham had said 600 years earlier. God will provide a lamb. And man, that provision was extraordinary for that first Passover. I mean, if you take even conservative estimates of the number of Jews at the time of the first Passover, and you figure the average home would have likely had a dozen or so people in it, that would be like 150,000 homes. So 150,000 lambs. And that is really hard to get my mind around. Even when I consider Egypt at that time, would have been about the size of Fresno and Tulare County combined. 150,000 lambs. And Abraham had told Isaac, God will provide a lamb. And that time there had been that old ram, not a young lamb, but at that time it had been enough, but there was a part of the will provide that had not been fulfilled. And here, 300 miles and 600 years later, a mix of the wealth and the greed of the Egyptians and the work of the Jews led to hundreds of thousands of lambs. And the blood from each lamb was to be painted on the door frames. Because God had said, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. Now, in the you there, God was talking about the Jews, but somehow it caught the attention of at least some of the others, because as the Exodus began, the Bible tells us many other people went up with them. But that first Passover, as Tim Keller said, there was either a dead son or a dead lamb in every home across Egypt. In every home, there was either a dead lamb or a dead son. Now, that was around 1400 BC. 1400 years. B stands for, C stands for, okay. 1400 years BC. So for 1400 years before Jesus of Nazareth was born, the Jews passionately celebrated Passover. As God had commanded in Exodus 12, this shall be for you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. And they did for 1400 years. B.C. Quick review. B stands for, C stands for, all right. Entire history was divided between those two. Passover was the epicenter of festivals in the Jewish year. If they were physically able, Jewish men were obligated to celebrate it in Jerusalem. Now, I'm not great at math, so I asked AI to do some calculations for me. It said 25 million lambs would have been sacrificed on all the Passovers from the time of the first Passover until the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. 25 million lambs. Now, as John reported in his biography of Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. 6 days before the Passover, Jerusalem would have been filling up. Bethany was just on the outskirts, kind of like Reedley to Parlier. So Bethany would have been getting packed too. And there was way more excitement than normal that year because news about Jesus and his miracles, like raising Lazarus from the dead, had spread across Israel and beyond. And word got around that Jesus was going to be there for Passover. And that led to the massive parade that is still marked around the world today that is known as Palm Sunday. And Pilate was there too. As Rome's governor, he would have gone with a big entourage to Jerusalem every Passover to remind the Jews who was really in charge. So his supporters and his sympathizers would have been there in big numbers, and there was almost certainly a parade for him too. So Jerusalem wasn't just crowded, crazy crowded. It would have been on edge for a whole bunch of reasons. The well-known Jewish historian Josephus said on a year like Jesus' last, 250,000 sheep or goats may have been sacrificed over the course of the Passover week in Jerusalem. 250,000. Now, many historians say the population of Jerusalem at the time was about 30,000, so about the same as Reedley. And even conservative estimates say it grew beyond 500,000 that year. So think of the entire population of Fresno squeezing into Reedley. And then, appropriately for this year, try to think of everyone trying to get to the McClarty Center amidst thousands of sheep. And you think it can be hard to get down Reed Avenue on a Friday afternoon? That traffic circle, man, is crazy. Even squeezed together, this is where my brain went this week, even squeezed together, one sheep would take up like 3 to 4 square feet. So you multiply that by 250,000, and you would need more than 10 football fields to hold just the sheep. And in the midst of that kind of insanity, Jesus pulled his closest followers together in a home, and as they settled in, he told them, I've been very eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. And knowing he knew all that was coming over the next few hours, I look at that verse and I can't even begin to imagine all that was going through his head and his heart. In his Jewishness, Jesus would have celebrated Passover every year of his life. As God, he would have known every detail of the story. And he would have known in the fullest sense Isaac's questions and Abraham's answer. Where's the lamb? Well, God will provide one. And at some level, everyone in Jerusalem knew they needed a lamb. Because at some level, they all knew there was wrong that needed to be made right. And Jesus and his 12 closest followers stepped into this setting that was traditionally reserved for family, for blood family. And 11 of them didn't have any way of knowing they were about to become a whole other kind of family. And even though Jesus stepped to the place at the head of the table, he did not quote tradition, and he didn't give the traditional, cherished history lesson. He said things no one had ever dared to say. I can't even begin to imagine how it would have sounded to them. See, normally, and for 1,400 years, the table host would take the bread and would say something like, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are in need come and celebrate the Passover. Instead, Jesus told his disciples, this bread is my body, broken for you. Don't ever forget me. And on the table, by that time, there would have been 4 cups for their wine. Each cup, very symbolic. The third cup was the cup of redemption. That's where we get our church name. And it was raised in remembrance of the saving lamb's blood. And Jesus lifted that cup and said something no host would have even dreamed of saying. He said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." And man, that would have been jarring. Oh, that would have been so startling. It would have been almost blasphemous. Unless it was true. Unless his sacrifice was enough. Unless his sacrifice is enough. But at every Passover meal, the main course, the focal point was lamb. While they probably didn't fully understand all the whys about it, they all would have believed what the writer of Hebrews would write about 30 years later. Without the shedding of blood, what you going to do with your wrong? Because without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Every household would have brought a lamb to the temple in Jerusalem to be sacrificed. And its blood was symbolically sprinkled by priests. And the meat was taken home, and it was eaten during the Passover meal. But for me, the weirdest thing about that Passover for Jesus and the disciples was that none of the Bible writers even mentioned lamb on the table. Now, I don't think that's an oversight. I think that was someone making a point. But I wouldn't be surprised if some or all of the disciples thought Isaac's question, where's the lamb? See, more than any other time of the year, not having forgiveness would have been unthinkable at Passover because sin had to be taken care of. Wrong had to be made right. That's a huge part of what drew people to Jerusalem. It's a huge part of what drew people to the temple. Something in them knew things weren't right. There's something wrong around them. There was something wrong within them. And something in the Passover whispers, wrong can be made right. And whether you realize it or not, your sense of that is part of what the Holy Spirit uses to draw you to a time and a place like this. While anyone can find forgiveness anywhere, there is still something in all of us that lets us know forgiveness is a significant part of what can and should be found in a sanctuary. This can be way more than a building. It is a building. But there's something about it that says, come here. There's one here who makes this unlike any other place. It's a sanctuary. And that's one of many reasons we're so excited by the thought of the McClarty Performing Arts Center being transformed into a sanctuary next Sunday. We're not just going across the street, y'all. We want it to be a sanctuary where people see the Lamb, where people come to know the Lamb, where people are reminded. We want people to hear the answer to Isaac's question, where's the Lamb? Somebody after the first service asked me, where's the lamb? We had a great conversation. Look at the way the First Nations Bible has this part of Hebrews chapter 10. And by the way, this was written before the TV series came out. But it says, the chosen one. did what Creator wanted when He made us holy by offering His body once for all time. Under our tribal law, holy men keep performing the same ceremonies day after day and making the same sacrifices over and over again. Remember, at that point, 1,400 Passovers, 25 million lambs. And it says those sacrifices can never take away bad hearts and broken ways. Look at the but in the next part. But the chosen one. After performing the once for all time ceremony to heal our broken ways, sat down at Creator's right hand, the place of greatest honor. And He now rules from there, and He waits until all His enemies have been defeated and humbled. For by this one offering, He has for all time completely set free the ones He's making holy. Man, I would love the Holy Spirit to make Isaac's 4,000-year-old question echo in here this morning. Where's the lamb? Well, we're going to celebrate communion. Seems like a pretty appropriate thing. Where's the lamb? Well, He left us a picture of Him. It's really bizarre that He would leave something this small. But He said, do this. Now, before we do this, I need to ask you, do you know the answer to Isaac's question? Do you trust Jesus, what He did 2,000 years ago, do you trust that with your wrong? Not just a one and done thing. Time after time after time. Because the simple bread and cup are an invitation to remember the Lamb. And to trust Him again and again and again, because they point us to the Lamb. They invite us to remember, to confess our need for Him, to admit it's a constant need, because as much as it ever has, sin is crouching at our door. And confess this for yourself personally, but do this together. The line is, sin is crouching at my door, okay? Everybody together, so it's a corporate confession. Sin is crouching at my door. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if an old hymn is playing in some of the heads in here, and it features more great questions. What can wash away my sin? Oh, you know the song? Yeah. The line is, nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? For my pardon, this I see. For my cleansing, this my plea. Nothing can for sin atone. Not of good that I have done. You know the chorus? Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. And this morning, the way we're going to receive the two elements is going to be a little different. They're going to lead us in a musical form of confession and proclamation. The words are 160 years old. But because of what they say and through the ministry of the Holy Spirit, they can be as alive as ever. So listen to the lyrics or sing them. And as you do, when you sense you are at a place where you remember, when you know Jesus is alive and real and here, you take the symbol of His bread and His blood. It's your time in this song as you interact with the truth that's being musically proclaimed. And taking them into our bodies is like a public confession of our faith in the one they represent. And when a group of individuals do it personally, it turns into a collective, corporate act of confession. And the Holy Spirit can take a room full of individuals remembering and, if you will, remember us as a body. So if we think we're like all members, this is part of us being remembered, being brought together, remembered into one body. He pulls all these diverse members together. And while communion is to be very personal, it is also a public and visible way of saying, each of us saying, I need the Lamb. And then thanking God by saying, I have the Lamb. Guys?
I hear the Savior say, thy strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Lord, now indeed I find that power and thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart of stone. And when before the throne I stand in him complete, Jesus died my soul to save. My lips shall still repeat, Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. He washed it white as snow. He washed it white as snow. No, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. And Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. He washed me white as snow. He washed
love that they took us into He washed me so we could make it personal. Because Jesus knew better than anyone how essential it is for our faith to be personal. But Jesus never intended us to live our faith out privately. His call to follow is overtly public. Part of that starts in a place like this, where we celebrate together. That takes it beyond just me and invites you. Baptism is this bold, visible declaration of faith in the Lamb who was sacrificed and who died and who rose to new life. And if you recognize your need for the Lamb and you walk in gratitude for Him, but have never publicly expressed it through baptism, I encourage you to seriously consider taking that step the week after Easter as a demonstration of your desire to live a resurrected life marked by God's grace and mercy, and showing your willingness to let others know it through you. That last part's on all of us who believe. And that, let me show you somebody I met on Friday. Well, I'd known him before, but I'd never seen him in this role. Can we get that picture up there, guys? There, Dino. You might have seen him downtown every once in a while. I had just finished putting the final draft of this together, hopped on my bike, I was exhausted, went to the gym, turned the corner, and there's Dino. He summed my sermon up. It's not about the bunny, it's about the lamb. And folks, if a fiberglass green dinosaur can proclaim that, we should be able to as well. Go do that, will you?
Praise the one who paid my debt, raised this life.